What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Mordeau Mortgage Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Thibodeau, here in Huntington Beach. So I run a mortgage branch. Nothing super exciting. I don't know why I ended up choosing mortgage, but I did. Been doing it for 20 years. And part of this podcast, the purpose of the podcast is twofold: to educate borrowers and realtors, but also to help salespeople and loan officers. And one of the things I've wanted to do for a while now is have Paul Miller on. Paul Miller, who's out of Utah, has been in mortgage for how many years has it been, Paul?
A short 22 years.
Yeah, even longer than me. And it's nice having Paul around because, you know, he's a little bit older and wiser than I am. And it's nice to be able to lean on Paul when I'm trying to lead the troops, so to speak. And it's just nice to have somebody who kind of gets it, you know, when I'm having a bad day or struggling a little bit, I can call Paul and he understands. And he's always got that sage advice for me because it's more than just a mortgage with Paul. Like, he brings a lot of life experience, whether that's, you know, relationship, marriage, children, financial advice and investing.
A very nice way to say he's old.
Yeah.
Experienced.
That's the way it works, man. That's the way it works.
That is the upside. That is the upside.
Yeah. And I just, you know, for whatever reason, the older I get, I recognize there's so much value in that. You know, when you're younger, you feel like you kind of have it all figured out. Your ego's a little inflated and life hasn't had an opportunity to crush you yet. I've gone through the crush phase, so to speak. And so I'm a little bit more passionate these days about hearing from our elders. You're not that old, Paul. You rucksack like a maniac.
That's
anyway.
5 times a week with my 40 pounds, exactly. Trying to hang on to that youth.
So let's kick it off. One thing I would like to do is just get your take. We're going to dive into a few things, but one thing I would like to do is just get a high-level overview of the market and where you think the real estate market's headed right now. You know, let the younger salespeople hear from you. And, you know, we've been in this industry struggling for about 3 years now with high rates higher for longer and inventory issues and you name it, homeowners insurance fiasco. So where do you think we're headed in the next 6 to 12 months? And what's your advice for the younger salespeople these days?
So my personal mantra is that I picked up just in the last month or two is do more in 24 to thrive in 25. I think we've had just, you know, getting our butts kicked for a while now. I mean, it was so good for, you know, a couple of years. I mean, so good. And everybody kind of got used to that, or like, I'm getting into the business. And so for the last 2 or 3 years, we've just been getting pounded down. You know, you see article after article on you know, worst mortgage market in 20, 30 years and the rates and all this stuff. So the short answer is, I think 24, we got this ramp. I think we'll get one cut, probably 0.5%, 50 basis points in 6 weeks when the Fed meets. And then I think we see 3 to 4, depending on how wobbly the economy gets. And we've all, you know, your eyeball test says, yeah, inflation's killing me. I mean, I go to the grocery store and it's just some steaks for me and my wife, my brother and his wife, $52. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? So I don't care what the reports say. Inflation is crushing right now for everybody. And so I think that's gonna, you know, that's the bad news. The good news is, yeah, they're gonna dial up the rates, help things out. I think that coupled once the elections are over, regardless of which way it goes, we got some. Next spring will finally be a good year. So nose to the grindstone, like I said, do more in 24 to thrive in 25. So,
yeah.
But that's also the perspective side of, you've gone through the tough side. I mean, I've seen for 22 years. When I first got into, it shows how old I am. When I first got into the business, just a few months after I got in, rates just ticked from 10% to 9.99. So technically single digits. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, did you ever think we would see under 10% ever again? And it was a party, and, you know, production started ramping up. I mean, can you imagine production starts ramping up at 9.99? So,
Yeah,
like I
if
said,
anything,
they
this
just
market
protect
did us a favor, right, Paul? I feel like this market did us a favor, and I'm not like discounting the fact that there's been a lot of struggling and suffering going on. So I understand that, but that also serves a purpose. But we kind of needed to get off this addiction of historically low interest rates, and as painful as this has been, it's purged our industry of salespeople who weren't serious players. It's gotten the psyche of the consumer used to a more normal interest rate, right? And it's
Yeah.
also, I think, starting to show some healthy signs, in my opinion. Depends on what state and market you're in, but inventory-wise, inventory is finally starting to do this, right? It's starting to grow. And
Did you know the natural watermark for money, for rates, where it's not too expensive and it's good for the market? I mean, and I remember reading this years ago. The natural watermark for money is 6%.
yeah,
That's a healthy market. Now
yeah,
we got I can't even say spoiled, but brainwashed that
yeah,
20%. That was the abnormal, and that's been the last 2-3 years. I try to tell my clients, I'm like, 3%'s not coming back,
yeah,
and if it does, things are on fire.
yeah,
3%'s not going to be here. So we get to 5.5. That's great. The natural watermark. I mean, you read it, economics and understand the basics. 6% is that equilibrium.
yeah,
So once and again, nature doesn't like overgrowth. There's lightning strikes and it burns down forests when it's too crowded. And we have realtors and appraisers and title and mortgage, and I mean the whole bush was too much. It had to be cleaned out. That's
yeah,
just nature taking care of itself. With
yeah.
the nature of the market.
A lot of careers are going to be made by this moment in time for the younger salespeople. When I was younger, I was 24 in 2008, and that was my time to either go back to school or move back in with my parents or get a divorce, whatever, file
Yep.
bankruptcy.
Yep.
None of that happened because I made the decision to find a mentor and figure this out, right? So I stayed in the industry. And what I will tell you is in that time, I was taken more seriously and I was listened to because the market was going through the purge and the transition, right? That people were getting out of the industry. I was cold calling realtors and they were saying, yeah, why don't you come into the office? I want a young and hungry loan officer. And I was like terrified of that success. And I didn't even want to show up because I didn't know what to do. I was in over my head. Point is, I had no idea what I was doing. I was 24 years old. But because the industry was going through what it was going through, I was given opportunity, and the same can be said for what's going on right now. If anything, more so because I feel like, I don't know about you, but I feel like what we're dealing with right now is probably worse than what we were experiencing in 2008 because of the duration. Like we're talking about 3 years, low inventory, high interest rates, as compared to back then, massive inventory, low interest rates. That's kind of the difference there.
Yeah, but the same. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Feel.
Yeah,
And and if you think back, it was 2008, and it wasn't until 2012 before all of a sudden you were like, oh wait, this isn't that bad. I mean, it was 4 years, and we're hitting that 3-year mark now. Again, nature, what do they say? History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes.
yeah,
And we're going through that in a different, manner. But two of the things you've said actually that um, I try to tell the other loan officers around me is just getting out and doing the work. And you're like, oh my gosh, whether you're afraid of it or not, just go to that open house. Don't think about it. Don't have a big speech rehearsed. So I went out last weekend and I got 3 new realtors that were like, oh yeah, sure, and a deal. And
that's so cool.
and I'm thinking, geez, okay, I got to get out there. And 2 of the realtors said, yeah, you know what, you're like the first or second loan officer that I've seen just in like, but I haven't seen anybody in over a year. And I was like, wait, what do you mean you haven't seen a loan officer in over a year? And I said, one guy was like, yeah, I mean, he was 24, he was new, he got hustling, he's making his cold calls and got this listing. And he said, yeah, he goes, I had a lady last week, but other than her, I haven't seen anybody in a year. The next open house, she's like, I said, you're probably getting loan officers in here. And she's like, I haven't seen a loan officer in over a year. So that perception that like, oh yeah, it's too late, or there's already a million loan officers knocking on the doors, and no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Everybody's scared to death to go to an open house. We want to have this big speech and like, okay, I'm gonna add this value, and I'm doing. You know what? Just go out there and be like, hey, you know what? My branch manager told me to prospect, so I'm out here doing it. You'll get mad respect just for that.
Yeah. And leading with that transparency is refreshing to people, and they have to do the same thing. Realtors sitting in an open house are doing the same thing that you're doing. They're prospecting. And I love the story you shared, man. Like we overthink this, right? Paralysis by analysis. I'm not good enough. What should I say? Oh, our open house is even worth it. Oh, agent sitting open houses don't do any business. Like fill in the blank, right? All the narratives that tell you shouldn't do anything. You should just sit on your chair and stare at the blue screen and watch YouTube videos about how to be successful. By the way, that's never going to lead to success. You actually have to take the action, and it's not that. Like people try to make it more than it is. Literally, the act of showing up to an open house.
It's 80% of it.
Yeah.
And now you temper it with expectations. Okay, not everything's going to be a home run. You're not going. So I went to 5 open houses. Now I had a phenomenal day because I had 3 that were like, let's market together. And I had 2 that were like, yeah, that's fine, but I don't want somebody that's going to be I don't want fine. Restaurant's fine. The movie was fine. My date was fine. I don't want fine.
Yeah.
But going out and doing that, I saw an interview actually with Roger Federer. I mean, greatest tennis player of all time.
Oh, yeah.
And he talked about not the matches and the games, but the points that he won. He only won 54% of his points.
Yeah.
He didn't win every single one, just barely over half, 54%. I'm like, how is the greatest tennis player of all time 54%? You know, in my brain, I'm like, well, he's got to be 80 or 90. And we hear the baseball analogy, but to have a different one, I'm like, oh. So, you know what? Go to 5 open houses. Let's see what your statistics are.
Well, and that's the thing. I think people underestimate patience and consistency.
Oh.
Right? Like it is boring. Like success is not sexy or exciting. It's boring. And that's the hard part, right? Because ultimately you can go to 5 open houses a weekend for 6 months, and there's a possibility that you see 0 ROI from that. And that's the hard part where, sure, you can get lucky and meet the 3 agents and you guys just hit it off. We all have those stories in prospecting where it's just dumb luck.
Well, and those are the stories that are great for the podcast. It's not like, I went out last week, went to 5 open houses, and I talked with a bunch of DTDs. And
nothing burgers, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's like, that's a great podcast. Yeah, I want to go out and grind it out.
But the reality is, the 10,000 hours of mastery, the overnight success was the result of 20 years worth of effort, right? Like we got to focus on the fact that it's not fun. It can be boring. There's a mental game because there's so much dead space in between the successes and the victories, where the self narrative is, man, you're not good enough. Like, why are you even doing this? Like no one cares. That person next to you who's flashy on social media, has 6-pack abs and a great personality, who does loans too, he's going to destroy you. Shouldn't even show up, right? Like all that stuff that goes on in your head. And the reality is it's just noise. And that's the mental game, is like recognizing it, having the self-awareness for, oh, that's just noise, and not falling into it and showing up no matter what, 5 open houses a weekend, yada, yada, yada. It's not sexy, but it's what leads to success.
One of the biggest things that I've learned just in 50 years is everybody goes through the same thing. And we like to feel unique and special as humans, and we are. But on the other hand, the guy that's having great success today, it's not sunny every day. There's rain in everybody's life. And I remember learning that very young, that everybody takes a pee. Everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time.
And the other thing is, we don't know what they're going through inside, right? Emotionally, spiritually, they might be struggling, even if they look on the surface like perfection personified. The other thing that helped me, somebody told me, hey, look, at the time there was a little over 7 billion people on the planet. If you're constantly going to play the game of wanting to be enough or be liked or be approved of by every single human being you encounter on this planet, it's an impossible game. And while you're playing the impossible game, you're going to be completely miserable, right? So it's just not possible. Like, there's no way every single person you encounter is going to like you or approve of you or want to do business with you. So you really have to just be okay with that and recognize that.
Well, and just being comfortable with yourself, and that just takes time.
Yeah.
I mean, and it goes in, fits in spurts. It is hard to get to that point. It took me until I was late 40s, early 50s before I was like, you know what? I kind of like me.
Yeah.
Not for everybody. And I, you go through these kind of growth spurts, and one of my personal growth spurts, my wife found these shirts. So I've been, like, the last 3 or 4 months, I'm like, just wearing just goofy, crazy shirts. Why?
Yeah,
Because
that's what I love about our podcast.
Okay.
Paul, I love your shirt, the old version of Jason Thibodeau. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but I'd be wearing a tie and a suit, a fancy hair, and I'm just, this version of us, just being what we enjoy being rather than what we think other people want us to be, is just it's a great way to live.
Well, I think I shared with you my Senate story where I learned that everybody's the same, regardless of where you're stationed in life.
Do we want to dive into that story?
Well, we can do it. Yeah, I'll do a shortened version.
Sure, go ahead.
So when I was 16, I was very blessed. I was a page in the Senate out in Washington, D.C. And so we just, go out there, and it's about a 8 to 1 year kind of internship in high school. And what a great opportunity. I mean, now I'm old, so Reagan was president, and George Bush Sr. was vice president. So I go out there, and I had challenges with rules when I was younger. I will admit this. So they had, as a page in the Senate, you can literally go anywhere in the Capitol building because you're delivering messages and things like that. And there's only 2 places that you could not go. You could not go into a senator's inner chamber, like his private office, and you couldn't go into kind of their ready area behind the Senate. So you have the Senate you see on TV on the whatever station it is there, or channel.
Yeah.
And behind that, they have kind of a senator's lounge. And we were not allowed to go back there. And if we were caught back there, we would be sent home. They have a bathroom back there and a bar and a place to lounge and stuff. And the senators never used it. So they said, you get caught back there, you're going home. So I'm in there going to the bathroom one day because the bathroom for the pages was way far away for some reason. So I'm in there going to the bathroom, and it's these old-fashioned ones, kind of a stand-up one for the ladies. That you have the urinals that kind of come up to your chest and go actually all the way down to the ground, usually tile around it. And I'm in there going to the bathroom, I'm standing there, and in comes the Vice President of the United States. And comes in and stands, there's probably 10 stalls, and he comes in and stands right next to me, and I'm like, holy smokes, what is a freak is going on here? And I'm scared to death. And 10 seconds later, Bob Dole, who was the Senate Majority Leader, comes in and stands on the other side. And I'm like, they're going to send me home. I'm going to be a disgrace. I mean, I'm literally sitting there with my wiener in my hand, frozen. And
this story.
Yeah, Bob Dole's a war hero. He has a kind of a gimpy hand. So part of me is like,
the Republican, he was the nominee for the Republicans back in the day.
Yeah, he ran for president at one point. But like I said, World War II veteran and had a gimpy hand. And so I was like, how's he going to fish it out with the hand? So he did, everything's fine. And they're talking, and I'm at the time I'm a sophomore in high school. I'm 5 foot nothing. I was just a little shrimpy guy, and they're literally talking over me. So Bob, how are you going to vote on SR 52? They had all the bills numbered. I don't know. I need your support on this one. Well, okay, if I do that, then can I get backing on the bridge for? Okay, and they're just negotiating 30 seconds, and then they finish up and zip up and go wash their hands, and I'm still literally like a statue, haven't moved. And they left, and it was a real nice blessing from God or the universe for me to have a couple of realizations at that point. The first realization was, no matter who you are, you got to take a pee like everybody else, or put your pants on one leg at a time. I mean, they're literally two of the most powerful men, or three of the most powerful men in the world. Okay, yeah, we all have to go to the bathroom. The next biggest thing that I realized is you're not as important as you think you are.
Yeah.
And people don't notice you like you think they do.
Yeah.
And they don't talk about you like they think you do. I mean, you're like, oh my gosh, I said something stupid in that meeting, and everybody's going to be thinking that I'm an idiot and stuff. And it just.
Oh, I had that problem all the time, man.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that this week at a meeting I had.
Yeah. And what happened in the meeting? You're like, oh, and guess what? I say this to myself, get over yourself. You're not as important as you think you are. Nobody cares. You're not thinking.
It takes a load off, man. It really takes a load off when you have those realizations. Like,
well, and let me ask you, from that meeting that you had where you kind of think maybe you said something that was kind of goofy or out of state, do you remember anything else that was said by anybody in that meeting?
No, definitely not.
So do you think anybody else remembered what you said in that meeting?
Of course not. And I know that, but it's funny because we're still human, even with the awareness and the learning and the wisdom that comes with life experience and age. Those feelings still come. It's just a question of, do we fall into that, or do we
can we recall an experience or that's going to bring us back into that? And so he said, even now at 50 something, I'm like, oh, and then I'm like, guess what? George Bush has no idea who you are.
Yeah.
Bob Dole has no idea who you are. And they finished, and I'm thinking I'm going to get sent home and I'm going to be disgraced. And I bet you nickel, they didn't even have any idea that I wasn't supposed to be there.
Yeah, exactly.
So, doing that, you hear all the cliches, and there's a reason there's a cliche, is because it comes from human experience.
Yeah.
Whether it's zebras don't change their stripes, or, whatever cliche is there for a reason. So get outside your own head. 80% of it is just doing it, just going out and just go to the open house. Don't have a big list. Make the cold call. So when I call my realtors now, I don't think about it. And actually, you're the one who might call. I'm like, hey, listen, my branch manager said I have to prospect more. So I'm calling. You know how that goes. And that's been the best introduction that I've had. They're like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
The fact that you're even picking up the phone and calling, that's huge. And sometimes they don't have time for it.
It's just relatable. It makes you human. It makes that level of transparency and vulnerability is so, like, it's a connector. It makes people relate to you. One of as far as like the cliches you were talking about, one that I really like that I have in my recurring calendar at 2 p.m. You know how we always get that moment at 2 p.m. where we're like, we don't really feel very motivated. I can't do coffee anymore at 2 p.m. because I'll be up all night. So the thing that I put in my calendar that reminds me, it says, no one cares, work harder. Right? It's like, we get in our head, the negative self-talk, like, oh, well, maybe I don't need to do anything. That's just a nice little reminder. And I'm not trying to beat myself up. I'm not trying to make it negative, but it's just a real reminder. Like, get out of your head and get back to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I you could even say, nobody cares. Just do one more thing.
Yeah.
We're not overwhelmed with that. And you touched on one other. Have a mentor, have a guidepost, have somebody. If I'm a 25-year-old loan officer, a 22-year-old loan officer, get a mentor. And it doesn't have to be the top producer of the world or anything like that. Just get somebody you're like, you know what? I like where he's at. I like where she's at. I like kind of their message and their vibe. And older, younger, doesn't really matter the age. You don't need this, guy with a gray beard and, Gandalf leading you down the path. You just need somebody that is where you would like to go. One of my biggest lessons. I was a little bit of a hothead when I was younger, and I had a branch manager. We're all 1099 at the time, so and I went off on my processor and just hollering and swearing and whatnot, and called me into his office, and he was 4 or 5 years younger than me, but like I said, had a branch, had an office, started a real estate um, office as well, and he said, "I don't ever want to hear you talk like that again." And I'm a pretty mild mannered, I'd like to think. I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "If I hear you go off like that, you're fired." And I'm like, 1099. He goes, "I will throw you out of this office. You will not be welcome back." And we're good friends. And I'm like, "What is going on? What are you talking about?" And he said, "Paul, I expect more from you. And if you're the calmest guy in the room, you will always win." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "You screaming, hollering, swearing. Great. You feel better and everybody else around you feels like crap. You don't need to swear and yell at people to get the calmest guy in the room." And I went, "You know what?" I said, "Okay, I'll make a commitment right now. I will never do that again." And I haven't. I mean, it took some cycles. I mean, I never screamed at anybody else or swore or whatnot. And that has served me well for the last 20 years, because now realtors call, and now fortunately I have a great system. I don't put myself in those positions anymore. But when I do get stuck in a position where temperatures are hot and moving vans are involved and people have expectations, then the calmest guy in the room always wins, always. So if you can learn that in your 20s, no one wants a pinhead that's yelling and screaming and swearing, regardless of the situation. So,
Yeah, I think you touched on something that is important for people to hear at the earlier stages of their career is finding mentorship. You know,
yeah,
good leadership changed my life. Surrounding yourself with good people. Now, that can be a bit of a tricky game because
yeah.
the reality
You
is
mean the
you do have to
mentoring?
find that. What's that?
You mean the mentoring can be challenging?
It's not. No, I think finding the right mentor, right? Because the one thing I will say is in this industry, barrier to entry is very low, right? Just have to pass a
Yes.
test, and voila, you're a licensed loan officer. And then there's a bit of a salesy mentality to our industry, and I
You
guess my
think?
encouragement to younger people to this is to find somebody who uh, doesn't have too big of an inflated ego, right? That values work-life balance, that values family, that doesn't, need to be in the spotlight, so to speak. Find the guy that just works harder than everybody else, but doesn't necessarily need to be in the spotlight, right? Because you are who you surround yourself with, and I think good mentorship matters, but also find the right mentor is important too.
So have a one of the things that I learned about mentoring, because when I was younger, I wanted to get like this guru mentor. And I realized that probably in my 30s, I ended up with 2 or 3 different mentors. And one was a mortgage guy mentor, because he did great at mortgages, but his home life was just a poop show. And then I had one guy that was kind of like, I just, I admired the way he dealt with his family and with his religion and with all those things. And so I had that as a second one. And then I had an old guy in his 80s that I just liked his life experience. So
Yeah,
sometimes I think we get wrapped up. It's like, well, I need this mentor that has it. You know what? Nobody has it all together. and
right.
then, and if they do, sometimes they don't have time for you, or there's this perfect balance. So find a work mentor and then find a life mentor. It doesn't have to be the same person. So there's one of the things that I kind of spent a lot of cycles looking for the perfect mentor. And don't be afraid to fire your mentor. I had a guy that I worked with for about 6 weeks. Geez, back in my late 20s, and I was like, no, I don't want to be anything like this guy. And then I was like,
Mm,
hey, you know what? My schedule's just, and I did the manly thing. Instead of telling him, I was like, yeah, my schedule's just gotten full. And I quietly backed out. So don't be afraid
yeah,
to fire a mentor, and don't be afraid to have more than one looking for different things. So,
yeah. Good advice, Paul. Paul, thanks for spending time with us today. Um, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I guess
Yeah.
at this point, is there any parting advice in wrap up mode to the younger salesperson who's struggling in this marketplace right now?
It doesn't, I mean, whatever you're going through, it doesn't last forever. And I know you hear those things and those sayings, but take it to heart because it is true. And the other would, don't overthink it. Just drive up to an open house and get out of your car. I mean, the hardest door to get through is your car door. So just go through and jump in and do it.
I love it. Paul, thanks for spending time with us today. Really appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you for doing this. A lot of people talk about podcasts and doing that, and you're doing it. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely, man. It's an honor to have you on. All right. Nice work.
See you, brother.